My guest today is the Monster Professor.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. My name is Matt and I am your host. This is the show where we learn how to become better game masters and better role players. Please visit DiceGeeks.com and you will find show notes and links and helpful resources, as well as books that I write, all geared to helping people play role-playing games better. I am really excited today. My guest is the author of The Black Palace, a novel. He is also the author of Oh Monstrous World, which is a collection of short stories, which is the winner of the 2019 International Book Awards for short story. He is a real professor, but he is also the host of the Monster Professor podcast. Josh Woods, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you again for the invitation. Like I said, congrats on starting your own podcast. It's a dangerous but very fun thing to do. And it might very well suck away large portions of your life in time, that is. But I think it's going to be worth it. So it's a real pleasure to get an invitation from you. And just to make sure it's on record, I extend said invitation to you to be on the Monster Professor as well after we're done with this at some point.
Okay. Well, I appreciate those kind words. And yes, absolutely, I will be on your podcast.
Cool.
Just let me know when, and
Okay.
I will be on there. So first off, just obviously you are a monster expert. Could we just kind of define monster really quick? Now you're not talking about, say, like a human being that's committed a horrific crime or something like that.
Well, we haven't done an episode on real life like serial killers or mass murderers or, tyrants, but we probably should, because that's like third that comes up in most people's minds. But so far, all of my focus have my monsters in literature, myth, film, games, folklore, culture, and beyond. And so I'm very much a big fan of monsters that are in one way or another fiction. Well, see, that therein lies a problem too, because I say fictional, but I've talked with people on the show who take them quite seriously and literally, and I'm not even sure myself anymore on so many monsters. I've had people who tell me that my episode on ghosts was unfair because ghosts aren't monsters because ghosts are real.
Oh, okay. Well,
So, like, I don't. So. And I get these delightful emails from listeners, some of whom I know as students or former students or friends, some of whom I don't know, and they'll go into these wonderfully articulate rants about how the one thing I talked about is a monster, but another will not be. For instance, one really smart young lady wrote me an email explaining why I shouldn't have talked about the phoenix as a monster, because that's something different. I'm like, all right, a fabulous creature. And so I try in one episode to give my definition of monster. I don't remember the name of that episode. It's something like Monster Definition and Horror Theory. I kind of lay out a little bit academically. I don't think you'll get any two people to agree on what a monster is, but I'm perfectly happy focusing on, and I do this in my fiction as well. Oh Monstrous World, a collection of completely unrelated short stories, except that they all, in one way or another, explore the monstrous. And so everything from actual killers all the way over to werewolves, dragons, vampires, aliens, you name it. I cover them all because apparently I love them, which I didn't really honestly realize until the past few years, that I've been obsessed with monsters my whole life. So,
Okay, so why are you obsessed with monsters and say not puppies?
Well, because the puppies thing is it's kind of solved in my mind.
Okay.
I have a pretty clear idea of what a puppy is, some sort of young dog, and one particularly that's cute, and it doesn't present a whole lot of mystery. The confrontations I will have with puppies in my life or in my literature or whatever is it's going to pee on me or bite me or chew up something that I don't want it to. And that's it. And I know it's going to grow up, not grow. With that said, actually, though,
Hmm.
I springing to mind is this silent film era cartoon in which, and it had to be from the late 20s, maybe early 30s, maybe even earlier than the 30s, maybe late 20s, in which they find this strange looking puppy, this nice little American couple who find this strange looking puppy. It's like a puppy, but this weird like duckbill mouth, and they feed it, and that's not enough, and it keeps eating, and it's getting bigger by the minute, and you think, oh, they're not going to go all the way with this cartoon, they're not going to keep doing it, and he starts eating the other pets and then the family members, and then eventually he's bigger than the city and they're trying to shoot him down, and this old black and white silent film thing. So you never know, maybe puppies are monsters. But that's a long way of saying monsters open doors. When a monster is in a story, in a film, in a game, they open doors to so much more than something that's purely mundane. I think it's a chance for the story to transcend its particulars a little bit. I think it's a chance for a challenge, say, in an RPG, to open up to more danger and more possibility than you could with a normal, say, mundane NPC, for instance. Um, Monsters are a chance for so much more than puppies. Sorry, puppies, unless they're monstrous puppies.
To me, kind of like in my limited, I guess, reading and things, it seems like there's a couple types, right? It seems like there's kind of the monster that we slay to like overcome some kind of obstacle, but then there also seems to be kind of like the monster inside of us. Do you see that when you're reading or when you're writing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the great monsters that straddles both those categories by its very definition is the doppelganger. I think the monster that's external, the monster that you have to deal with like any type of external threat, but one that is simultaneously you. And facing yourself might be the worst kind of problem, especially facing the worst version of yourself. Um, I didn't quite realize I had such an issue with doppelgangers personally until conversation with my publisher on O Monstrous World recently, right before or like during the proof galleys scenario of the stage of the book publishing process. He's like, well, one thing we got to think about, Josh, is we got to think about order because you have so many doppelganger stories in a row. I'm like, I don't have any doppelganger stories. He's like, yes, you do. This one, this one, this one, this one. I'm like, oh my God, I've got issues. But I do think that the best monsters draw on the unknown in those dark reaches just beyond the firelight of what we know and what civilization is. And so there's something extremely external and vast and beyond our reach or understanding, but there's also just as big of a dark, vast chasm on the inside as well. Whether that's the consciousness or the soul or wherever you want to get to with it. That's something I think Lovecraft did fantastically. Is he somehow drew on both simultaneously? I think all the best writers and myth makers do both simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that is that even something kind of along the lines of like Odysseus having to hear the siren but refuse her call as well, something like that.
Oh, that's a good one. And I did an episode on sirens and mermaids, by the way. If anyone
Oh,
wants to check that out
well,
too.
I'm definitely going
Um,
to check that out.
yeah, I think that's a fantastic one. I mean, he, he knows what he needs to do to get through that obstacle, but they tempt him not with just sex and not with just a beautiful song. The things they will sing to him are these bits of wisdom and knowledge that he can't get anywhere else in the world. And so he wants so badly what we all want. We want all the power from that monster, but we don't want the curse part of it. And wise and wily Odysseus comes up with a strategy, right? I mean, we all want like all the powers of the vampire, but we don't want to be cursed with all the bad sides of it, right? And
Yeah.
so he wants the best of both worlds, and he kind of gets away with it. Although, other writers have played with, how that stuck in his head and cursed him, like the Odyssey Part 2 that you get a little bit out of Dante, hints of it in Dante's Inferno, and Jorge Borges plays with it as well in his literature, that after he tires of Ithaca that he regained, he just sets sail again, and he is still setting sail. He's cursed to keep circling the globe because he can never quite get over what was implanted in his head that one day with the sirens, which is a pretty cool thought, I think.
Yeah, I think Alfred Lord Tennyson, right, in his poem, right, said
Yeah.
at the end he couldn't rest, right? That Ithaca was too small of a place, right?
Yeah, I think that's in that line too. I think he was probably, Dante, Tennyson, Borges. Yeah, they all kind of see Odysseus in that way, because you can't just like get all the best of the monster and not have to pay for that, right?
Yeah.
Something shall come.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fascinating, and uh, it does seem though, like even from the earliest literature that we have, on to the present day, that human beings are fascinated by monsters. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're absolutely right that from the earliest literature, we have monsters in it. Like the earliest story we have, and the stories weren't really in prose except for around the campfire for the longest time, right? They were poems. And
Mhm.
so the earliest complete piece of literature we have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates even the earliest portions of what would end up becoming the Bible by a long shot, by 1,000 years plus. Um, and that is essentially Gilgamesh and his sidekick Enkidu, who's kind of like Chewbacca anyway, so he's kind of like a monster anyway. A hero and his sidekick go tromping around fighting monsters. That's what they do, and that's the earliest story we have recorded. You could go a little bit earlier into the Mesopotamian creation stories that are more religious than literature, into the Enuma Elish. And what is that except Marduk fighting Tiamat? So you have a superhero fighting this dragon of chaos. And so from the very beginning, it's monsters. And I think there's we could dig into it psychologically or mythologically or maybe like metaphysically. I don't know, but one thing for sure is that we love monsters, and we can't get enough of them, because they're from the earliest to this day. I don't know what movie's coming out next month, but I tell you what, if it's going to hit theaters and people are going to watch it, there's going to have a monster in it, and so
Yeah.
so are several others.
Yep.
Why is it? It's a huge question, and it's one that I've been trying to figure out an answer to. I think there are a lot of great answers to it. I think Ursula K. Le Guin has a great answer. Tolkien has a great answer. I try to explore those in my series. I have a few episodes that are called Monsters in Literature. And that's
Mhm.
one question I keep trying to figure out. We go from the earliest tales through all the what I consider to be the major monsters in literature up to recent ones. And I'm trying to figure out, but I don't know, but I think it has a lot to do with how much the monster stands for so many things in our own minds and so many things we encounter externally, and they encompass more than the particulars that can be dealt with and solved and understood. Like, no matter, like, cancer is a massive problem, and there's no easy answer to it, and there's no cure. But we know what it is. We know how to detect it. We know a lot of ways to treat it, and maybe one day it will be less of a problem or no problem at all. And that's a possibility, but you will never be able to pin down exactly why the serpentine monster keeps rising up, right? You will never be able to slay all the dragons, because some other type of dragon is going to come up. And once you think you've slain all the dragons and you're not worried anymore, then one's going to burst out of your chest while you're eating a meal on the Nostromo or something like that, okay. Right? So, you can't ever pin that down. And we need that. We need to keep that in our stories. Obviously, because we do.
Yeah, and I know it was a very large question. So yeah, and because there does seem to be this just a tremendous amount of facets to the monster, right? There's something about the unknown. There's something about our fear. There's something about obstacles that we can't explain. And I'm sure the list would just kind of go on and on. So there's just a number of ways that that we could, look at a monster. Just even taking one example in one story.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there really is. And I mean, you can break them down a little bit or categorize them. In fact, I don't know when this is necessarily going to air, so I don't know whether the episode I'm talking about is going to be available yet or not. But I recently, the other day, had a chance to talk with the great scholar Tom Shippey, and what he wanted to talk about, not necessarily the thing that he is most known for, which I really can't mention for one reason or another, but that's perfectly fine, because he wanted to talk about his taxonomy of monsters. He wanted to categorize all monsters in a kind of scientific way, and he lays out his branching tree of all types of monsters in this episode. It's really fascinating. Not at all how I would do it or how I think about it either. And so it's really, but it doesn't take very long before you come up with exceptions. There are always monsters that jump categories. So, and at any point, like you're saying, you could zoom in on one monster, even just like the robot, and suddenly that means 5 big things all simultaneously, so it's cool.
No, that sounds fascinating. I'll definitely have to check out that episode as well. But yes, I guess even just thinking about it, I guess you can kind of see how you would try to categorize them that way. But yeah, it does seem that they defy categories, because there is so much that is wrapped up in them. You mentioned Tiamat. You have then the chaos or the creation of the world, but then you have things like maybe even the beast of Geduvant or something that is just that's might just be a rabid wolf or something like that, but it takes on kind of I don't know, it takes on a kind of almost a life of its own because it's surrounded by mystery.
Yeah, and that werewolf or the wolf monster. There are a whole bunch of those. So, in my mind, that kind of beast monster is one category, and that ends up being a favorite answer for a lot of guests I have on when I corner them and I say, okay, what's your one favorite monster of all time? A lot of them end up going with the werewolf, and that totally makes sense in a modern society where you're not allowed to act out all your rage and anger and fear and hunger and appetites and stuff. There's the monster who is especially if it's the werewolf, you finally get to release all that kind of animalistic side of yourself, as opposed to, say, the zombie, which is this horrible vision of the one thing that we all think we're becoming, is this, like, identityless, soulless, hourly worker in this in your group, right? Like you're not an individual. You're just like one thing as part of an identity group that just supposed to shamble along and go along party lines or whatever the hell it is. I don't know. And we're all like terrified of becoming that, and yet see it all around us. Like, so I feel like those are two very different types of monsters. That mean different kinds of things, but both of them absolutely relevant. And so that's just a glimpse at the way I kind of see monsters, as to what they mean and what they're telling us, but more importantly, like why we need them so much, that we like them, we want them in our video games, in our role-playing games, in our movies, and our stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what's your favorite monster?
Oh, why'd you do that to me? Oh, okay. All right.
If you can't pick, that's all right.
I'm not gonna be a coward. I'm gonna face this monster of a question. All right. Okay. Actually, in the past few I did a few book tour readings and a couple of lecture series as well. And this question has come up a few times. And my answer then, I think, still stands as it is right now. It's going to change. Who knows when? Maybe next week. But as for right now, my favorite monster of all time is Fenrir, the wolf from Norse mythology, or also known as the Fenris wolf. And he's this wolf. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm sure you already know who he is, but I can't help but talk about it, and just in case any listener doesn't. So, in the gods of Norse mythology have these kids of Loki to deal with, because Loki, kind of cheated on his wife with this giantess named Angerbroda, and they have she has 3 kids by him. One of them, Jormungandr, this serpent that grows so big he encircles the entire world. The gods are like, what do we do with this guy? Throw him in the ocean, forget about it. And so they do. And then one of the children is Hel. And this is a very creepy kind of emo goth young lady. And she's very dangerous. And they're like, let's just appease her by giving her the whole realm of the underworld, and that works for her. Okay. And then Fenrir, they're like, what do we do with him? Well, we don't know really, and we can't just kill him because that would curse Asgard. Let's just chain him up. Like, good luck. He's getting bigger and stronger every day. And so they go up to him with these chains. They're like, would you put these chains on voluntarily? He's like, you guys are up to something. I'm just a wolf, but I'm not stupid. However, I'm not a coward, and there's no gaining, honor or renown unless you take risks. So I'm going to give it a shot. Go ahead, put them on me. I'm going to bust out of them. And they do. And they think he's not getting out of these. And then boom, he bursts out of it and chews them up. And he's like, I'm out. And they're like, oh my God. Well, they are the gods, so they're not saying that. But they're thinking, oh no, what are we going to do? We got to go get a bigger chain. And so they go and get a bigger chain, tougher one. They try it again. He's like, you guys are still trying to trick me into something, but I don't care. I'm brave. I'm strong. Let's do it. They put him on him. Boom, it bursts out of them. We're like, we got to come up with something else. So they go down into the world of the dark elves / the dwarves. There was no real distinction for the Norse. We love distinction now. We would not be cool with that now, but they didn't. That was the same thing. They didn't care. They go down there, and then the dwarves fashion this impossible ribbon, a ribbon made out of the sound a cat walks when it makes when it walks, the beard of a woman, right? Like all these things that are there but not really there, and they weave together this impossible ribbon, and then they take this to Fenrir, and they're like, can we like wrap you up with feet and mouth and everything? It's like, this one is tricky. I know you're up to something, so let's strike a bargain. If you put it on me and I can't get out, then you have to let me out and you just declare yourself the winner. But I'm worried that you're not going to let me out even after I give up. And so one of you put your hand in my mouth, and if you try to betray me, I will chomp your hand off, and there's no growing it back, even if you're a god, because I'm Fenrir. And so, and then the gods huddle, and they're like, we're totally actually going to like betray him and trick him because we want to like chain him up and bury him alive. One of us is going to have to lose a hand, and nobody wants to do it except for the old god, Tyr, who might have originally been the king of the gods for the Norse and was later supplanted by the younger one, Odin. But anyway, the old one, Tyr, says, I'll do it. I'll lose a hand over this. So he sticks his hand in, wrap him up. He can't get out. He's like, all right, guys, let me out. They're like, yeah, we were lying. We're not going to do it. Chomp, he loses his hand. God knows what kinds of what horrible vision that was to see a god lose a hand. It's like if you were there, you would go blind and insane. It was, I'm sure, a horrible thing. And then all the gods tackle him and drag him and bury him alive. And there he waits. They buried this dude alive. He didn't even do anything wrong. They were just afraid that they couldn't deal with him. And then he's furious, and he finally gets out in Ragnarok at the end of the world, which hasn't come yet, but it's going to any day now. Fenrir is going to rise up, and he's going to go on this rampage, and he's going to eat the world. His jaws are going to open so wide that his chin is going to dig furrows into the earth while his nose presses against the ceiling of the sky. And he's going to run along eating everything. He's going to eat the Midwest. That's what's going to happen to the Midwest. And he's going to go to the West, and then he's going to eat the ocean, and then he's going to come back around and eat the other ocean and eat the East Coast. That's where we're all headed. And it's this amazing monster, and he's justified in all his in his destruction. Oh, I just love the guy. Okay, that's my answer.
Okay. That was awesome, man. No, that was great. That was great. Well, now you've mentioned your book a couple of times. I know you have a novel and then the collection of short stories. Could you just tell us a little bit more about Oh Monstrous World?
Yeah. So it's a collection of short stories I've been writing over the years. They've all been published in various magazines, literary journals, websites as well. A whole bunch of different short stories, and the style of them. They're all published in literary locations as well. And then Press 53, who put this together, is primarily known as the literary press as well. So technically it's literary, but it has a very dark horror bent to it. So, so I think it's fair to say the stories are smart, but I wanted them to work as literary, and I wanted them to work as smart, but I wanted them to be just as cool and fascinating and funny in some of them as any genre story, which is just as difficult, if not more, than any literary story. And so we've got stories that range from one about, say, a masked killer and how horror theory works with mass killers, to a UFC fighter who fights actual monsters for cash in a burnout warehouse in Kentucky.
That sounds amazing.
A post-apocalyptic Viking story. At one point, another writer challenged me.
You just tripped a couple things for me, so I'm definitely going to have to check this out.
It's a really fun collection. It's all over the place, but yet there's a unified theme. And I was really happy to find other people responding so well to it. Not only publishers who are wanting to get a hold of it, but awards. And who knows, maybe more to come, because the most of the 2019 awards haven't finished out. But even if not, the International Book Awards is an awesome win too. Yeah. So, and I think it's in part perhaps it has a little bit to do with the writing ability. I think chances are it's much more to do with the fact that I'm writing about stuff that I think is cool, and a lot of other people think it's cool too. And so, really, we're just enjoying cool stuff. I think that's the same thing that's happening in the podcast as well. Like, how can you not like cool stuff? So let's like it.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. I mean, post-apocalyptic Vikings. I mean, how can you not like that?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Now your novel, The Black Palace. Could you tell us more about that one?
Yeah, that is set in a modern world in which witches are real. And in this, I wanted to build a story world build. I wanted to build this story world in which I get every monster that I ever wanted, but I wanted some type of through line to make sense. And I also found that no one was doing witch stories like I wanted witch stories done until my wife reminded me one night around the campfire while we were drinking beer and talking monsters. I'm like, nobody does witch stories. Like, there's not the witch book. You have the Dracula or the vampire book, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? You have this for so many things, but I want witches done my way. She's like, you're a writer, do something about it. Oh yeah. Okay. So in this world, every monster is real, but they're all the works of witches. Like, ghosts are real, but only because witches dragged them back from the dead and kept them here. Werewolves are real. Yeah, because they cursed men into dogs, right? Vampires are real. Yeah, because they built these they made vampires. Like, so everything in the world is real, but all because witches have done these things. And so in this world, you've got to deal with witches. So we've got the Witchfinders Union, and one branch of the Witchfinders Union, essentially a supernatural SWAT team, is on this one night getting a chance to raid the Black Palace, which is this. There's this one room in a town nearby here in Illinois, in which the stairs don't lead anywhere and the door doesn't open anywhere, but it does. It leads to another part of the Black Palace. There's another room in Istanbul in which the stairs continue, and it's the other side of that door. And there's another room somewhere else. And if you know how to get into it, suddenly you're in this living, endless labyrinth. And that's where the witches are, and that's the fortress of the witches. And they get a chance to get in there on this night, and yet the door shuts on them and they're trapped inside. And so we get a novel in which we're trying to make it through the nights with a supernatural SWAT team stuck in the world of the witches. But we also get to see things from the witches' point of view as well, in the world from that other side. And so in that way, it's a pretty big novel. It's kind of epic for one novel, 115,000 words. So it's a long read, but I think it's a really fun journey into things that I think are fascinating, and I think others find fascinating as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fantastic. Now, as you know, my audience is more focused on tabletop role-playing games. The Black Palace almost sounds like a campaign that you could run. Do you have experience with tabletop RPGs?
Yeah, and actually, not only do I credit tabletop RPGs for a large portion of my storytelling training, writer training, but yeah, the Black Palace is kind of like my version of a campaign that we used to run. We used GURPS, Steve Jackson's GURPS system, and we made vampire hunters, but we tried to keep everything about our characters as legitimate as possible. Like, we would give them a budget, and then we would go shopping through catalogs and online to find out how much these things would actually cost and make sure everything was for real. That would really work, rather than just saying, oh, they have the stake shooting gun. There's no stake shooting gun. You got to come up with how that's going to work, right? What are you going to do? Get a crossbow and then what? Wooden bolts? That's not going to work. So you got to come up with something else. And so we wanted everything to be as legitimate as possible, given the confines of that there are vampires as well. And then we extended our sessions beyond just vampires into other types of monsters as well. And I just never quite got over it. And, the college and a job and all these, and life happens. And I ended up breaking away from a lot of my original gaming crew. And so in lieu of getting to role play when I want to, I just wrote the stories out. And so it was really my chance to live out a game that I didn't otherwise get to play. But I even have in the back of the book, I even have inventory sheets of all the things that the character. So they're kind of like character sheets for all my characters in the novel. It's that nice. Much role playing inspired.
Very nice. I think I don't know if you find it's true. I think secretly a lot of game masters just really wish they were writers. Do you find that's true?
Well, I don't know. I honestly don't know a lot of game writers or game masters. I know a lot of writers, and I have to admit, I'm one of those writers who secretly just wishes he were a game master instead. It's just I don't know. I don't know how you guys do it. Maybe you have more friends than I do, or more friends nearby. I just can't, I can't end up getting together, a gaming time as much as I want to. And so I write kind of in lieu of that. But I think in either way you look at it, and I've been trying to come up with ways to incorporate live tabletop role play in the creative writing classroom as well. It's worked really well a couple of times. I've got to come up with a way for it to work, even if some students aren't so into it. That I haven't quite figured out yet. You kind of need everybody to want to do it for it to work well. But but I still think that tabletop role playing teaches you more about storytelling in, say, just a few sessions than any craft book in the world could, and then in most creative writing classes could. But still, to take this back around to your work, which I think is so brilliant. Your books on the random tables, and you're wanting to come up with ways to make storytelling this fluid, organic, the process in which you can go with a story. By the end of my role playing time, that's where we were going. I would have, like, we were doing this essentially monster fighting occult world, kind of Hellboy-ish BPRD kind of world in 1939 Germany. And so we would have in Berlin. So we'd have the Berlin map, and I'd have different locations, and I'd have some characters in the locations and different things happening. And then I knew what the world was, but that's all I knew. They had a kind of a mission, but several options. And so I just let the characters go, and I just went with it. And so it all ended up being ad lib. Those were the greatest game sessions. But that's tough to do unless Matt Davids is around and we have his materials, and we can buy those on Amazon.com and other places. And that can really help you out, even if you're a writer too. I think what you're doing is really brilliant for storytelling and tabletop gaming. You have those resources available. It's really cool.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And a couple things. First, I've never really been accused of having more friends than like anybody before. So, especially if you talk to anybody I went to high school with or something like that. When I was role playing, especially when I was younger, I would introduce my friends to the role playing. And when somebody is willing to be the game master a lot, you'll be surprised how many people just actually want to play. You will find people starting to hang around saying, "Oh, can I play?" Somebody's willing to, run me through a game.
Yeah.
And then also, about the books of random tables. Again, thank you for talking about that. I do have at least one or two novelists who say they use my books to come up with items in, whatever places in their settings and stuff that they are describing. And then another thing you touched on is just the kind of the almost like the improvisational feel. Like, to me, when using like a random table or something, while I'm running a game, I don't know, there's something about rolling the dice and coming up with a situation or an item or a thing that I just wouldn't have thought of necessarily at that moment. And then having to take that and to work it into a story, there's just something, I mean, it's almost magical, really. Because I think often at the table, I get kind of stuck in my ways. I get, I know some shorthand because I've been running games for, longer than I, care to admit sometimes. And it's just, having kind of a random result, just a random result, some item that I wasn't thinking about or some situation that I wasn't thinking about, just kind of turn everything on its head, and having to react to that. Sometimes I just think that just creates magic at the game table.
Yeah, it really does. It's that same kind of magic that, when it happens in a novel, or it doesn't happen as much in a lot of movies anymore, but it used to, and it may again, and so, and it happens in good TV shows too. But at the game table as well, something that you don't expect, but now you're ready to deal with it, and a whole new doors open, and it's such a freaking cool thing. And there are some writers who have tried to incorporate that into their own writing, in which like significant portions of the plot are a surprise to them as much as the reader, and then they just they just run with it. But having that happen at the table and during a game is magical. It's so fantastic. And I've never, like, I've run some games before. I ended up being, the GM more so than the player, I think, for a lot of times when I was playing. But I wanted, I played some of those like different versions of GM-less games. They're a little bit more like board games, when
Sure.
like Wizards of the Coast makes some. But I really think, I don't know, I really want a GM-less role-playing game, like a full-on role-playing game. And I don't know how well that can work, but however it works, it's gonna work based on the direction that you're going with these random tables and then rolling with it. I think I've kind of been inspired recently to really get into trying to design a role-playing game, get back into this world after so many years. After talking with Luke Crane and Tor Olivsrud from Burning Wheel, they put together Mouse Guard, a Torchbearer, a Dungeon World. They do some fantastic stuff. And after finding out how they went about doing it, hell, anybody can make a game. And Kickstarter is right there, and Kickstarter loves game designers, right?
Yeah.
And so, I want to be able to, for just two people to sit down and have a full role-playing game, both as players, without just one person having to GM. I don't know how that's possible, but I'm working on it. And I'm thinking your direction for it too.
Okay. Well, yeah, well, that's fantastic. And I'll definitely, I'll put a link to that interview where you talked to Luke Crane, and that in the show notes to this episode.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I mean, of course, there are some GM-less games, but I don't know if you're familiar with Microscope.
No, I don't know that.
Yeah, Microscope is kind of like a world building game or a timeline building game, and so you build a world, and there is no game master, so it's not like you're not playing at the character level, though. Although I think the creator was working on a game for that, and then also, I guess maybe Fiasco. I don't know if you've heard of that one either, but
no, I don't. See, I'm pretty ignorant of games, so maybe I should check them all out before I try designing one. But really, I just want to come up with one for me, right? Yeah. And a few of my people more than anything. So I'm going to check those out, though. But
yeah. And then I guess just so at the game table, how could a normal average game master, how could they make their monsters a little bit more than just kind of a wandering thing that's, a wandering monster in a dungeon that has, 84 hit points or whatever? Is there something they can add to that, just either through story or something, to make it just a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think my approach to it, I think the same answer applies to, if you have a monster in a story or a novel you're writing, how do you make it more than just a plot device as well? Or if you're making a film, how do you make it more than just a visual gag and a plot device? I think they all come back to the same answer. Kind of part of the same answer is to why monsters matter, which is seeing the monster as something real rather than just a like this familiar tool that you're there to use or defeat or something like that, or a tool or obstacle that you're there to use or defeat. Seeing things from the monster's perspective. You got to talk with people from the Ray Harryhausen world, which is so awesome and fantastic. And Harryhausen was one of those people who his advice to other monster makers and special effects artists were, the monster you're creating. I think Guillermo del Toro said this, because Guillermo del Toro went to Harryhausen, not in very later years, of course.
Sure.
When he was trying to make that first Hellboy movie, and he went to him for advice, and Ray Harryhausen said something to the effect of, "You're not making monsters when you're making monsters. You're making a real animal. He sleeps somewhere. He defecates somewhere. Like, he's in different moods at different portions of the day. He's in different moods when you're even encountering him. Let him do his own thing. And when you're fighting him, you see these brief moments of interruption in his world." And that's how he thought about his monsters. And I think that's the best way to think about it. Like, these monsters have these entire lives. It's just a brief portion of a day where they have to encounter some stranger that's interrupting what they do as their routine. And thinking about it like that really starts opening up doors for people who want a better monster and who want to see it from the monster's perspective. You'd be surprised what kind of things your monsters do once you think of it like that.
That's great advice. And well, Josh, I think I could probably talk to you all day about monsters and role-playing games, and stories and literature and movies and stuff. But I should let you go and get back to other activities. So I just really want to thank you for being on the show, and just to remind everybody that your novel is The Black Palace, and that your award-winning collection of short stories is Oh Monstrous World. I will link those up in the show notes at dicegeeks.com, so everybody can find those. And this, Josh, again, just thank you for being on the show.
Well, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and talking with me and throwing awesome questions my way, and for putting together all your awesome random tables as well. And I'm looking forward to talking with you on my show when I get to hit you up with some questions. But it's been a huge pleasure. So thank you again, man.
Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I have just like a million more questions I could ask Josh, and he has graciously agreed to come back on the show, and we will continue to talk about monsters, mythology, and folklore, and maybe I can get him to talk more about GURPS as well. If you want some free stuff, and I know that you do want some free stuff, please go to dicegeeks.com/free, and you will get 10 dungeon maps that you can use in your campaigns or sessions. If you want to support the show, it would mean the world to me if you would go to Patreon/dicegeeks and check that out. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep gaming.